Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where each week we give you another episode of what's happening here on our Northeast Iowa 21-acre homestead. My husband Alvin and I have been married for 25 years and we have 7 children. 5 of those children still live at home. Our oldest 2 are married and no longer live at home, so this means we also have 2 son-in-laws and 1 grandson so far. So on our 21-acre homestead, we seek to preserve the self-sufficient lifestyle of our Old Order Mennonite heritage for the next generation. We involve the children in every aspect of the homestead, from raising and harvesting our own meat, gardening and preserving to fill the family's larder, or preserving the dairy from the family milk cows, plus all the many other skills that develop the character and integrity and relationships of a family that seeks to bring glory and honor to their Heavenly Father. So my book releases September 9th, which means there's just a few days left for you guys to get the special pre-order price of 40% off by using this QR code. Hello YouTube family, welcome back. This is the only video I've made this week for 2 reasons. Number 1, we've been traveling. And number 2, it is the weekend of our annual school fundraiser for the private Christian school our children attend. So we have a lot on our plate this week. And if you've been here, you know that we don't actually create content in the way what can we create to entertain our YouTube viewers this week. Our channel is mostly driven by what needs to be done on the homestead this week, and can I film any of those things. So we came home, and guys, we're not going to see 70 degrees in the 10-day forecast. It's going to stay in the 50s and 60s. But there is some tomatoes on my tomato plants, and up until now, I have processed 6 quarts of tomato products from my tomatoes because they're just so slow. So today I don't have a lot of time because we just got home from traveling. I don't have a lot of bandwidth up here. So I'm going to take these tomatoes and I'm just going to turn them into tomato juice, because when you have tomato juice, you can make pasta sauce with that. So I'm going to do it very quick and easy. This is how to turn tomatoes into tomato juice. So the next thing that I'm gonna do while I'm down here is I'm gonna give these tomatoes a haircut. So I'm gonna trim back all the branches all the way back to where the first tomatoes are hanging. So like this branch right here, I'm gonna trim back to there. And what that's going to do, even though these branches still have blossoms on, those blossoms are never going to have time to turn into tomatoes before frost. So this is going to tell my tomato plants to put all their energy into ripening tomatoes rather than keep on growing and producing fruit. So I'm just going to take every branch back to where the first tomatoes are hanging. And that way my tomatoes will get the message and they'll put more of their energy into ripening rather than more blossoms and more growth. So there you can see, there's the tomatoes. So I'm just going to take that tip off. All of this, even though there's blossoms here on the end, there's never going to be time for those blossoms to turn into tomatoes before our first frost hits, I'm going to take that off so the plant doesn't have to support all of that growth. Oh man, there I did it. I was being too hasty and I cut too far back. I'm going to throw those to the chickens. Oh! So I was talking to another YouTuber here recently, and I was telling them that, yeah, my canning videos on YouTube don't do as well as they could because our garden produce is ready so much later than everybody else's because of where we live. A lot of people already have all their tomato canning done because they live in a climate where their tomatoes are already, you know, they can plant them long before we can. And we're only starting with tomatoes, right? The advice that this YouTuber gave me, they said, oh yeah, you need to take more of a creating content approach, and you need to purchase tomatoes to can in July so that when everybody else comes to can their tomatoes, your videos are already out there. I thought to myself, whoa, would I then just purchase the tomatoes and pretend that I grew them? Like, that defeats the purpose of this lifestyle, because we live this lifestyle so that the food that we're consuming is grown in nutrient-dense soil and not sprayed with pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. That's our number one reason for this lifestyle, is for highly nutritious food, not for content. So I decided that I wouldn't be purchasing tomatoes simply so that I can make the content in the window of time where everybody's looking for tomato canning content, right? So here I am in September, tomatoes. But like I said earlier, we are homesteaders first and YouTubers second. And that's okay. I would burn out if I would have to constantly think about entertaining content. It's much easier for me to decide what needs to be done and can I film this and make this a teachable video. So here I am canning my tomatoes and taming the tomato jungle so that my family gets enough food for winter. And I stopped at a roadside market the other day to order some tomatoes for our fundraiser at school, and she was saying a lot of home gardeners, a lot of people that normally grow all their own tomatoes are coming and asking for canning tomatoes because apparently it's not a good tomato year. But that is why on the good tomato years I will can way more tomato products than we need, because so that when we have a tomato year like this, I don't have to panic and buy tomatoes, because we have a lot of pasta sauce, and that's part of eating regionally and eating seasonally. If there's a year where you don't get a lot of tomatoes, you adjust your diet to reflect that. So we will just make less dishes that require a lot of tomato pasta sauce. We would just adjust our diet according to what we have in our larder. So one of the number one reasons I like to grow the Romas or the Amish paste tomatoes is because you don't have to core them. Let me show you. They don't have to be cored, and this little belly button type thing right there where the stem is fastened is so tiny you don't have to worry about it. And if you compare it with more of a slicing tomato like this, when I cut this one in half, there's that big white center in there that needs to be removed. Even no matter what you do, no matter what you make, you want to remove that white center. So I don't know, does it save me time by planting planting these and being able to just toss these right in? I don't know. You spend more time picking because for each one that you pick, you have less tomato, right? When I make tomato juice, if you've watched my other tomato videos, I normally throw them into the blender and blend up the skins and peels and everything, and I'll link my other tomato videos for you so you can find those. But when I have a small amount like this, I don't use my blender, and you'll see how I remove the skins and peels from these. Like I said, it's not a real good tomato year, so there's a lot of bad spots for me to remove, but that's okay. So right now I am washing, and then I'm cutting them because I'm going to cook these tomatoes, these tomato chunks. So I'm cutting them so that they cook faster. I'm removing the cores and the bad spots from all my tomatoes. The other reason I plant primarily Roma's and Amish paste tomatoes is because they make a nice thick juice. They're not very high in water. They don't have a lot of this in. And that's what makes a nice thick juice, is because they don't have so much of that water on the inside. So I feel like it saves me in cooking time when I use mostly Roma's and Amish paste. And I found this nice, perfect, unblemished slicer. And it's not real red yet, so this one will save a couple days. I'm going to save this one for fresh eating. That's the one thing, when it's a not good tomato year, you don't get as many perfect tomatoes. It works best to just leave your tomatoes on the vine until they're ripe. Because if you bring something like this up, now this one's not even perfectly ripe yet. If you bring this one up and set it to ripen somewhere in the shade, this spot right here is going to make the whole tomato rotten. So if it's a bad tomato year, you're better off letting your tomatoes hang on the vine until they're ready. Because even just a little spot like this will keep your tomato from ripening well off the vine. But as long as it's on the vine, you'll probably be okay. So when I have a bad spot like that, I always take a big chunk out. I can feel it soft, because sometimes a bad spot on a tomato can mean pathogens and bacteria are in there. If you put some of that rotten stuff in your pot, you risk contaminating the whole batch. Often when I have bad spots on tomatoes, I take a large part of the tomato away, especially if I can tell that it's soft all the way around the bad spot. And like this one, that one's like a scabbed over bad spot, so I'm just going to take a slice out of it right there. All right, look at me. I chose a good size pot for today's project. So we're going to get these tomatoes started on the burner. I'm not going to add any water to these because my whole goal is to remove as much water from these tomatoes as I can. So what I'm going to do, and you can use a potato masher if you want, I'm just going to squeeze these tomatoes to release some of their natural water and their natural juice. So I'm just going to squeeze these, because as they heat, they will release their water, but I don't want them to scorch onto the bottom before that happens. So I'm just going to smush some of these down to release some of their natural liquid as they start cooking. And then I'm not going to put a lid on this because I don't want to trap steam. I want the steam to evaporate. So we're going to get that started. And slowly but surely, I will get some tomato products onto my shelf. One of the most popular ways, not my favorite, one of the most popular ways to remove water from your tomatoes is to freeze your tomatoes first, and then as you thaw them, they release a lot of their water. And I use that method when I'm making ketchup, but that's the only time I will use that method. And here's why. By the time I have picked and washed and cored the tomatoes and gotten them ready for, taken all the bad spots off, put them in the, when I'm at that point, ready to put them into the freezer, I always think to myself, it's only 1 hour's more of work to get this all into jars, right? And I know myself well enough that if I put those tomatoes in the freezer, they're out of sight, out of mind, and I'm gonna push it off, forget that they're there, and I'll never go back for them. So knowing your personality and knowing how likely you are to go get those tomatoes from the freezer and can them is probably a big key there. But I don't mind cooking the water off of my tomatoes for tomato juice or pasta sauce. Yeah, we're just gonna let those get started cooking, and we're gonna clean up for the chickens. All right, so here you can see exactly how much liquid has already evaporated from these tomatoes. Because you can see we started out way up there, and now this much liquid has already evaporated, and they are ready to go through the colander. And how I check that is when I put my spoon in, if I mostly have tomato peels, then I know they're ready. So the next thing we're going to use is this thing. This is a colander, and it cranks the peels, it cranks the tomatoes through there and removes the peels and seeds. Alright, that's what we've got left of that first batch. And then we're just going to put these all through there. So when you're cranking these, if you have one like this, you want to remember you have to crank backwards too. So for about every 5 to 6 forward turns, you have to crank backwards, because that scrapes the seeds and the peels get stuck to those little holes in the bottom, and they sew it off so nothing can get through. So cranking backwards scrapes them all off the bottom again. It's my favorite for making small batches of things. It also works for making applesauce and pear sauce. You can cook your apples and pears with the peels and seeds in them, and then just run them through here. There we go. Just tomato peels and seeds in there. and the chickens will be happy for that. All right, I have transferred my tomato juice into a smaller pot. This is a 12-quart pot. I think there's probably about 8 quarts in here. There's 2 different ways you can go from here. I can bring this to a boil. If you feel as if your tomato juice is still too thin at this point, and that will all vary depending on what variety of tomatoes you had and how long you cooked them the first time around, right? So if you feel that your tomato juice is still too thin, you can bring it back to a boil and boil some more water off of it and until it reaches the consistency that you want, and then can it. And you can can tomato juice from this point in 2 different ways. So you can open kettle can it, right? So what open kettle canning would look like, it's kind of like you would can jams or jellies, right? You would heat this, and bring your liquid to a boil, and then you would spoon your boiling liquid into the warm jar. You would put the warm lid on, and then you would turn the ring on, and as the tomato juice cools down, it would, whoo, that scared me. It would create enough of a vacuum that it would seal the jar, right? I personally have not had really good luck open kettle canning my tomato juice. I think because I'm not intentional enough with keeping my jars warm and my lids warm. So the only time I will open kettle can is if I only have 2 to 3 quarts. If I have less than 7 quarts, less than a canner full. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to water bath can these. So because my tomato juice is about as thick as I want it to be, I am not going to cook it anymore. I'm just going to can it now. So I'm just going to fill my jars and hot water bath them. And I'm going to fill them to about a 3/4, like a 3/4 inch headspace. If you don't already have one of these nice little funnels that shows your headspace on from 4 jars, make sure that you follow the link that I have in the description to get your own funnel like that. So now, because the product in our jars is warm, I'm going to start with warm water in my water bath canner. And we got 1, 2, 3. We've got 6 quarts and then this one little half pint in there and just a tiny bit more, but I'm just going to drink this. So we're going to put water in until it reaches the product line. So now that these are at a rolling boil, I am going to set my timer for about 15 minutes. Here's why. I know that the tomatoes are already thoroughly cooked because I cooked them before I canned them. And if my product had been hotter, I would have probably just canned them for 10 minutes. But because my tomato juice had already cooled off somewhat, I'm going to cook them, I'm going to boil these for 15 minutes because I want the product in the jar to be very, very hot. So that when it cools down, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum means there's no oxygen between the product and the lid, so bacteria can't grow, and it also, as it creates a vacuum, it seals that lid down onto the jar. So 15 minutes and then we're done. All right, it's been 15 minutes, and we are going to remove these. All right, friends, there you go. I have another 6 quarts of tomato products to put on my shelves, and hopefully I've inspired you at how simple canning can actually be. This is almost a foolproof, and it's definitely a beginner's recipe. You can add salt to your quart jars of tomato juice if you want. I do not add salt to mine. Sometimes I do, most of the times I don't. What will we use this tomato juice for? I use it often in chili, in like a beef stew as a base. I'll use this and broth as a base for beef stew. And in very busy seasons, I will primarily can tomato juice, and then I'll turn it into, I'll open a jar, put it in a pot and add all the seasonings and turn it into a pasta sauce or a pizza sauce during the winter time. But it looks like I'll get enough tomatoes to make some pasta sauce as well, and maybe even some chili base. Thank you everybody for being here. We will see you next week.